Early in the morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept behind the Cheyenne Mountains, the familiar alarm clock on the nightstand began to tick dryly, a constant reminder. 5 a.m. This routine had become an inseparable part of me over decades of work, even when my body no longer allowed me to roam ancient excavation sites. I am Eleanor Ellie Hawthorne, 82 years old. I slowly reached out my skinny, freckled arm, groping for the snooze button in the darkness. My eyes squinted, adjusting to the faint light left over from the night before. I took a deep breath, then slowly sat up. My joints made a creaking, old-fashioned symphony every time I moved, the familiar sound of arthritis that had plagued me for years. Every movement was a small battle with this old body. I had been a renowned archaeologist, scaling the treacherous cliffs of Mesa Verde, digging tirelessly in the scorching sun of Chaco Canyon. Now I needed the help of an old wooden cane to get from bed to the kitchen. The cane, bought in Santa Fe in 1980, had become a part of me, not just a support, but a living memory of my adventures. Every scratch, every crack in it told a story, a journey. My small house in Serenity Hills, a quiet suburb of Colorado, is not just a shelter, but a miniature museum of my life. The walls are lined with faded photographs, like windows into the past. I see myself in them, young and vibrant, with silky black hair, a trowel in hand, my face dirty but eyes bright with the joy of discovery. There are also photos of my husband, Walter, in the blazing desert sun beside ancient ruins we've explored together. The bookshelves are lined with dozens of archaeological books, from in-depth studies to adventure novels I read to unwind after a long day at work. The maps are frayed at the edges, the folds smudged, still bearing the traces of my fingers tracing excavation coordinates. And especially the artifacts, broken pieces of pottery that I meticulously pieced together. Each small detail seemed to come back to life. Stone tools, tiny necklaces, all were displayed with great respect. They were not just artifacts, but the soul of history, the voice of civilizations that had sunk deep into the past. Each item was a story, a chapter of my life. I slowly walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of herbal tea. The gentle scent of mint wafted through the air, dispelling the chill of the early morning and the dull aches in my body. I stood by the window, sipping hot tea, watching the small street of Serenity Hills gradually awaken. Modern houses with neatly trimmed gardens, shiny cars gliding on the road, all appeared in complete contrast to the world I once lived in. A world long gone, of forgotten cultures, of souls buried in the sand. A feeling of emptiness crept into me, the loneliness of someone who was once admired, once the center of scientific conferences, but now lived quietly alone, almost forgotten by the world. I let out a sigh, then turned and walked back to my desk, where my old computer sat, my small bridge to the outside world. Checking my email had become a morning ritual. Most of it was just ads or irrelevant news. But today, a new email popped up, and my heart skipped a beat. The subject line stood out: Utah Ceramic Consulting Opportunity, from Dr. Laura Bennett. Laura, one of the best students I ever taught at the University of Colorado, a bright and passionate girl who had inherited some of the fire I had left. The message was brief but urgent. She had just discovered an unusual type of pottery at a new excavation site in Utah and wanted my advice, drawing on my extensive experience and knowledge of Anasazi pottery. A passion that had seemed dormant suddenly flared up inside me. This was not just a career opportunity, but a call from the past. A door opened for me to return to the world I once belonged to, a world where I was respected, listened to, and contributed. The pain of my arthritis suddenly seemed to subside, giving way to a new source of energy, an excitement I had not felt for a long time. I read the email over and over again, a small smile on my lips. Perhaps the life of an old and lonely Eleanor Hawthorne still had new pages waiting to be written. Laura Bennett's email was more than a job offer. It was like a window into a memory stream, drawing me back to a golden memory that seemed to have been covered in dust by time. I closed my eyes, and each frame came back to me, slowly, like an old film reel. I saw myself, young and full of energy, standing next to Walter, my late husband, partner, colleague, and confidant. He always had a radiant smile, his eyes sparkling with joy as we discovered another piece of history. We had traveled everywhere together, from the vast deserts of the American Southwest to the sheer cliffs of Chaco Canyon, where ancient Anasazi settlements lay in silence for ages. I still remember the overwhelming feeling of discovering an intact piece of pottery or a stone tool crafted with exquisite precision. They were not just inanimate objects. They were messages from the past, evidence of a civilization that had quietly fallen into oblivion, of people who had lived, loved, and created their own world. The feeling of touching time, of deciphering messages thousands of years old, was a special kind of happiness, pure and complete. Walter and I shared that passion, together overcoming many hardships, from the scorching heat of the desert to the cold nights under the stars. We were not just husband and wife, but soulmates, two souls resonating on the same journey of discovery. Interspersed with memories of Walter is the image of me standing on the podium, my voice echoing through the lecture hall at the University of Colorado. Young students listened attentively as I told stories about ancient civilizations, about the unsolved mysteries of Mother Earth. I still remember their bright eyes, shining with curiosity and a desire to learn. I was a role model, a pioneer in the field of archaeology, respected by colleagues and loved by students. My life has been a series of years of persistent dedication, tireless exploration, and passing on knowledge to the next generation. But when those beautiful memories passed, I opened my eyes and faced the naked reality, a reality that was heavy with loneliness and neglect. I thought of my son, Michael. Our relationship had long been broken, probably from the years when I was too busy traveling, leaving him feeling like a bystander in his mother's life. To Michael, I was not a loving mother, but a responsibility, a nuisance that he had to deal with. The few phone calls, the reluctant visits, all exuded distance and coldness. He had never truly understood my burning passion, much less the sacrifices I had made for science. To him, archaeology was nothing more than the odd hobby of a stubborn old woman. Sarah, my niece, was no better. The hustle and bustle of modern life had taken her away from work, her family, and her responsibilities. Our conversations were mostly superficial and social, never touching the depths of my soul. Sarah rarely contacted me, and I felt like a souvenir, put in the back of a cupboard, brought out on special occasions, then put away again. Only Ben, my nephew, occasionally maintained a connection. He would call to ask questions, sometimes curious about things I had told him. Grandma, do you remember those rock paintings in Utah? I saw a documentary about them yesterday. It was great. Those little words were enough to warm my heart, if only for a moment. But they were not enough to fill the endless loneliness, the feeling of being left out of my own family. I suddenly realized a bitter truth. While the scientific community still respected my contributions, still remembered my name associated with important archaeological works, my closest loved ones disregarded all those values. They did not understand, nor did they want to understand. They did not see the meaning in each piece of pottery I cherished, in the stories I lived and told. To them, I was just a weak, eccentric old woman, and perhaps a burden waiting to be arranged. Laura's email, therefore, went beyond a job offer. It was a silent confirmation that I was still seen, that my value had not been diminished, that the world I once belonged to, the world of knowledge, discovery, and contribution, still had room for me to return. In the face of my family's indifference, Laura's enthusiasm was like a warm breeze that rekindled the dying flame inside me. It made me wonder, should I continue to try to hold on to a family that would never truly accept me? Or should I follow the true calling of my heart, the path where I would find meaning in life? A deep-seated urge was stirring inside me. Could I reclaim my own voice, my own place, my own vitality? Not just in academia, but for the rest of my life? Or would I resign myself to living quietly as an old woman, cast aside by time and loved ones, drifting toward oblivion? The question haunted me, and I knew that even at 82, I still had the chance to write the answer myself. The next morning, as I was leisurely sipping my second cup of tea, still lost in my thoughts about Laura's email, there was a harsh knock on the door, firm and unmistakable. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Only Michael, my son, would knock so unsubtly, as if he had come to settle a debt rather than visit his elderly mother. He did not carry the warmth of a filial son, but appeared at my door as a tall figure with a frown on his face and a look of reluctance in his eyes. From the first glance, I knew he had come not out of affection, but out of duty. "Hey, Mom," he said without a greeting, without a word of concern for my well-being. His voice was flat, devoid of sincerity, like he was reading off a prepared note. "Sarah is having a party this weekend, celebrating Lily's birthday. Come." Without looking me in the eye, Michael scanned the room, as if checking to see if his mother was in order. The way he said it wasn't an invitation, but an order or an administrative notice, dry and emotionless. I could hear the coldness in every word. Still holding on to the faint hope that something might still be possible between us, I tried to share the small joy of Laura's email, a window back into the world I really belonged to. "Michael," I said, unable to hide my excitement, "Laura Bennett just sent me a letter. She needs your advice on a new type of pottery discovered in Utah. Maybe you could—" Before I could finish my sentence, he interrupted me with a snort of disdain, followed by a wry, mocking smile, the kind I had grown accustomed to in recent years. "Oh, digging up bones again? Mother is old. Take a rest. Who cares about that old stuff anymore?" The remark was like a cold knife that cut straight into my heart, tearing apart the small joy that had just been kindled. It was not only a mockery of my lifelong passion, but also a blatant denial of all the contributions I had made to science and knowledge. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, not from illness, but from a deep wound in my heart. That brief conversation seemed to expose the distance between me and my son. Michael did not come to understand or share. He was only interested in fulfilling the formal role of a son. In his eyes, my entire academic life was just a series of odd actions of a doting old woman, nothing more than a waste of time. He did not understand the beauty of ancient pottery shards or the joy of deciphering a thousand-year-old stone symbol for the first time. To Michael, I was just an old-fashioned mother, stubborn about useless things. I looked at him. His eyes were empty, cold, and devoid of any understanding or sympathy. It was a look I had seen countless times before, each time making me feel like an uninvited guest in my own family. I wanted to protest, to tell him that what I had done was not a game, but my whole life, my legacy. But I knew those words would fall on empty air because he would never really listen. Though my heart was breaking with disappointment, I nodded and agreed to go to the party. Part of it was because I didn't want to cause any more arguments, didn't want to be the butt of his complaints. But another part of me, small and fragile, still secretly hoped that I could find some connection with my grandchildren, especially Lily, my great-granddaughter, whom I rarely had the chance to meet. I told myself that maybe, in the warm atmosphere of a family party, I would feel more loved. But deep down, I knew that I was only holding on to something that had long since rotted, a relationship that only existed because I couldn't bear to let go. Michael's indifference and disdain made me feel like a shadow in his life. It was the first wall I had to face in my growing internal struggle. Should I continue to accept the indifference of my relatives or dare to step forward and assert my own worth, despite their contemptuous looks? My reluctant agreement showed that I still had a glimmer of hope, that maybe, if I just be patient, they would understand. But deep down, I knew that light was fading, and perhaps it was time for me to shine the light myself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. After the awkward conversation with Michael, a vast sadness suddenly flowed through my heart. That sadness was not loud, not fierce, but gradually permeated like frost, seeping into every fiber of the flesh, every memory of the woman who had gone through more than half of her life. But mixed in that hazy fog was a faint light, a fragile determination that I had not yet had time to name. Even though I knew that my presence would only be a stray ripple in the family atmosphere, I still decided to go. Not because I dreamed of a warm embrace, but because of a small hope to touch the innocent and pure world of Lily, the little granddaughter that I rarely had the chance to be close to. Who knows, maybe she was still innocent enough to look at me without judgment. I stood silently in front of the old wardrobe, the rickety doors making a familiar creaking sound when opened. The dim light illuminated the worn, faded clothes, mostly loose, sturdy clothes that had accompanied me through many seasons of archaeology, through the scorching Lao winds or the biting cold of the Anatolian plains. I ran my hands through each outfit, as if touching a part of my memory. Finally, I chose a simple light blue cotton dress. Not fussy, not outstanding, but not too sloppy. The dress was like a soft layer of armor, hiding me from prying eyes, as if I were just an ordinary woman, not too different, not too uncomfortable to accept. But what really mattered that afternoon was not the appearance. My mind was on the small gift I had carefully prepared for Lily. I walked slowly down to the basement, a place that was not just a storage room for my belongings, but a sanctuary. The dull yellow light from the bare bulb cast shadows as long as memories on the dusty old wood. Shelves were filled with cardboard boxes, old books, ceramics, gifts from the earth, each a slice of my life, the silent voice of sleeping civilizations. I found a tiny wooden box, the wood darkened, the carvings as soft as ripples on a pond. Walter had given it to me on our first archaeological expedition together, a time when my heart was young and eager for even the smallest discovery. I opened the lid and saw small sparkling stones, polished fossil fragments, ancient beads from a forgotten Etruscan tomb. Each one told a story, not a fairy tale, but a true story, about the earth, about time, about creatures that had existed millions of years ago, silently disappearing as if they had never existed. I picked out the most beautiful stones, beads the color of the desert sunset and the sky of Central Asia. I wrapped them carefully in a silk scarf of turquoise, my favorite color, the color of the deep sea, of hope. It was a gift I wanted to give Lily, not to show her how rich I was, but to show her that there was more to the world than what we saw on our phone screens. Each stone was a whisper from the past, a window into our imagination. I just hoped, if only for a moment, that Lily's eyes would light up when she saw it, the way mine had lit up when I first discovered a broken vase in the middle of a wasteland. But even as I tried to hold on to that belief, a feeling of unease crept into my mind, smoldering, persistent. My intuition, the silent weapon that had saved me from so many dangers in archaeology, was screaming. Something was wrong. The air was heavy. An invisible, nameless fear. It came not from danger, but from a sense of rejection. A sense that I would not be heard, that I would not be understood, that I would not be able to exist as my true self. I knew it, and yet I pushed it aside. I chose to believe in a glimmer of light, however faint, because if I didn't believe, what was there to hold on to? As I sat in the car, Michael drove silently through familiar streets. The beige roofs passed by the window like pages of a book I no longer wanted to read. The cramped space in the car only made the distance between us clearer. Not physical, but emotional, the distance of two souls that no longer spoke the same language. "Hey, Mom," Michael said, his voice as hard as cold steel. "Don't talk about archaeology at the party. No one cares. Just talk like a normal person about houses, cars, the weather." I didn't answer. I just turned away from the window, watching the trees silently drop their shadows onto the road. Michael's words weren't just a command, they were a declaration that I, with all my passions, my knowledge, my adventures, was something to be ashamed of. He wanted me to be quiet enough to be in the family photo, but not different enough to be offensive. I wasn't allowed to be myself, only a sculpted version of Ellie, the gentle, quiet, nice-talking grandmother. I felt choked up, not because of anger, but because of regret. Regret for a son who grew up surrounded by archaeological maps, trips, and fascinating ancient stories, but in the end chose to close his heart to all of that. I suddenly felt like an erased character in the very book that I had written with my whole life. The wooden box in my hand suddenly felt heavy, not because of the stones, but because of hope. I didn't know if the gift would touch Lily's heart or if it would be quietly placed in a corner of the closet like I had been placed on the fringes of this family's life. But I still held it because I knew that without it, I would bring nothing to that party but myself, a woman who was slowly being forgotten in the house built by her own son. As soon as Michael pulled up in front of Sarah's house, I felt a wave of suffocation wash over me. The house was ablaze with yellow lights, the music pounding like a never-ending wave, mingling with the laughter of the adults. I reached out to grab Michael's arm to get out of the car, but he quickly turned and strode into the house, leaving me to stumble with my cane. The feeling of abandonment had never been so clear. As I walked through the door, I felt like an out-of-place antique stuffed into a modern space, old, out of date, and invisible. No one came to greet me, no look or hand extended to help me through the crowded room. Michael and his wife, Karen, immersed in their roles as hosts, chatting, serving drinks, laughing with their guests, completely ignored my presence. They passed me by as if I were invisible air. My niece, Sarah, though a little more polite, paused only for a second to say, "Hello, Grandma, you're here. Please sit over there, I'm busy." She gestured to a single sofa in the corner, then hurried back to her work. In that moment, I felt like an unwilling duty, not part of the fun, but something to take care of. Each heavy, aching step brought me to that abandoned chair. I sat down, trying to relax and blend in with the atmosphere around me, but the feeling of alienation grew stronger. The conversations around me revolved around topics that had no interest to me. This month's paycheck, the launch of a new SUV, soaring housing prices, plot-heavy but bland TV dramas. They talked about people I had never met, events I had no connection to, interests I did not share. No one asked me about my travels, archaeological discoveries, or simply how I was doing. I sat there like a nameless spectator, watching a show I had not been invited to. I was a small, silent island, lost in the middle of a roaring ocean. Amidst the music and laughter, there was a sudden breeze of warmth. Ben, the only grandson who had ever made me feel accepted, came over. He sat down beside me, his genuine smile and warm eyes soothing my aching heart. "Hello, Grandma," Ben said. "How are you? I heard you're consulting for an archaeological team in Utah, ancient pottery. I think it's interesting." A smile crept across my lips, and for the first time that evening, I felt alive. I told Ben about Laura's email, about the exciting initial find, about the excitement of guessing the age of an unknown specimen. That small joy felt like a warm breeze, lighting up a fragile hope. But the light was quickly extinguished. Michael, passing by, heard the conversation and immediately interrupted, his voice carrying a hint of scorn. Come on, Ben. Talking about Grandma's eccentric hobbies again? Let her rest. His cold glare was directed at me, like a warning about the rules that had been given before. I felt a smoldering anger burning inside me. Once again, Michael had rejected me, my passion, my knowledge, my true self, right in front of Ben. The pain was not just personal hurt, but a complete rejection from blood relatives. The stifling heat of the cramped house, the constant noise, and especially the constant buzzing from the hearing aid made me want to get up and leave. The device, which had once been my bridge to the world, had now become a symbol of isolation, an obsolescence that I had been branded with. All my senses were tortured, my sight by the bright lights, my hearing by the constant noise, my touch by the shallow, unenthusiastic touches. I just wanted to return to my quiet home, where the antiques lay in the soft light, telling me stories that were truly worth listening to. Tonight, in the midst of this false luxury, I realized, clearly and painfully, that I am no longer valued by my family, not because of my age or my health, but because the values I hold dear no longer fit into their world. They do not understand, nor do they want to understand, the things I have devoted my life to discovering and preserving. To them, I am just a task, an old person who needs to be dealt with as appropriate. The realization hit me like a slap in the face, shaking me and waking me up. Perhaps it is time for me to ask myself seriously, should I continue to fight a hopeless battle for acceptance? Or is it time to stop trying and allow myself to be who I am, free, independent, and fulfilled in my own world? The answer, it seems, is gradually becoming clearer in my heart. The buzzing of my hearing aid seemed to be louder than ever, mixing with the cacophony of music, laughter, and meaningless chatter. Everything was like an uncontrolled storm of sound sweeping through my exhausted mind. I tried to stand up, a seemingly simple act, but turned into a painful ordeal. Every time I lifted my leg, a sharp jolt shot up my knee. Every time I turned around, a dull cry came from my hunched back that was used to enduring it. I needed some air, some silence, some space where I wouldn't be the odd one out in the middle of a strange party in my own family. My cloudy eyes scanned the chaotic crowd and stopped when I saw Lily, my little great-granddaughter, the only one at the party who still retained her innocence. She was playing by a small pond, the backyard an oasis of peace in the noisy desert. I knew this was my last moment, my last chance to leave something beautiful, something that was left of me for the next generation. In my hands was a small wooden box, worn by time, containing the ancient stones I had kept all my life. They weren't just specimens, they were memories, love, passion that had nourished my soul for decades. I dragged myself forward, leaning on my old cane, listening to its soft tapping on the tiled floor like the ticking of time. With each step, I had to suppress the pain in my knees, my back, my aching shoulders. But I kept going, not just because I wanted to give a gift, but because I needed to affirm that I still had something to give, that I was still a human being with memories, values, and deep love. I was only a few steps away from Lily when, suddenly, a hand gripped my shoulder. Before I could turn around, my body was gently but deliberately shoved. It was Michael. Look, isn't this fun? He laughed, his voice undisguised with mockery, as if the push was just a prank, as if I was nothing more than a character in a cheap comedy he directed in front of the crowd. I lost my balance. The stick hit the floor with a cold clack, and I fell forward, unable to stop myself. There was a loud whoosh as my body hit the cold water. Water splashed up, soaking my skirt, my hair falling limply. The first sensation was pain, sharp, piercing pain from hip to shoulder, but it was quickly followed by the feeling of being stripped, exposed to the crowd. I tried to rise, my hands shaking against the bottom of the pool, but my body betrayed me, old, heavy, and now cold and wet, like a rag thrown into a corner. Laughter, not one, but many. The laughter of my so-called family. "Grandma is so cute," someone laughed. "She's like a kid," someone else chimed in. No one ran to help. No one panicked or worried. They all stood there laughing as if my painful fall were a part of a boring party. Michael threw back his head and laughed, his eyes shining like he'd just pulled off a successful farce. Karen giggled, and Sarah just stood there, her eyes apologetic, but her feet didn't move. I don't know what hurts me more, the intense physical pain that is gnawing at my joints, or the deep humiliation of being trampled on in front of my own relatives. I, who used to lead many archaeological expeditions, who used to teach hundreds of students, who used to live an idealistic life, am now being made into a laughing stock, humiliated like a broken item in the middle of a frivolous party. There was only one person came running, Ben. Without hesitation, he dove into the pool and grabbed my arm. "Grandma, are you okay?" His voice was shaky and angry. "Michael, what happened to you?" Ben's words were the last remaining ray of light in the darkness that enveloped me. I felt strong, warm arms pulling me up, trying to steady me as my body shook and ached. When I was helped to shore, I was cold to the bone. My ankles were aching. My dress was stuck to my skin, making me feel like someone who had just been fished out of a well, ragged and lost. I bent down to straighten my dress and my heart stopped. The jade brooch, the first and only gift Walter had given me on my first expedition, was missing from my dress. It had fallen into the pool. I looked down into the murky water and knew it was gone. Not just a piece of jewelry, but a symbol, a memory, a love, a pride. And now, stolen, dissolved into this stupid pool of water at this stupid party. I looked up, met Michael's eyes, blank and indifferent, looked at the faces around me, laughing, confused, or pretending to look away. Something inside me snapped. I had had enough. I couldn't keep up the act. I couldn't keep playing the loving mother, loving grandmother role in a family that had forgotten how to love. "Take me home, now." My voice was cold, sharp as a knife, no longer trembling. No one dared to stop me. Sarah ran over, panicked. "Mom, don't go. Get changed and have dinner with us, okay?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked away, each step a decision, each heartbeat a farewell. I was gone, not just from the party, but from everything I had called family. The days after the accident at Lily's birthday party were the darkest of my life. The fall, which had seemed like a minor accident, had consequences far deeper than I could have imagined. I had a bad cold, a high fever, and my mind was spinning in delirium, disoriented between reality and fantasy. My whole body ached, and the stabbing pain in my hips and shoulders, the points of direct contact with the bottom of the water tank, seemed to never end. Bruises spread, visible on my skin, not only from the fall, but also from the humiliation of being exposed to my entire family. I lay in bed for 3 days, too helpless to turn on my own. Every little movement was a battle with pain and fatigue. To make matters worse, my hearing aid had completely failed after falling into the water. The world around me fell into an eerie silence. No familiar voices, no passing cars, no morning bird song, just a cold silence, like a thick layer of ice separating me from the outside world. It wasn't peace, but a more severe form of isolation. I was drowning in loneliness, and the painful memories cut like knives into my heart. Ben was the only one who took the initiative to care during those days. He called repeatedly, his voice full of worry and regret. "Grandma, are you okay? I'm sorry. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I talked to my dad, but he—" Ben paused, but I didn't need to hear more. I understood. Michael didn't text, didn't call, didn't apologize. His silence was as heavy as a sentence, not because he felt remorse, but because he didn't feel guilty. To Michael, it was all just a lame joke, and I was just an unwilling sidekick in the fun. He didn't just push me away, he pushed me out of his life. Alone in the quiet room, I faced myself, unable to escape. It was a real internal battle between physical pain and deep hurt in my heart. I realized that I could not lie here forever, waiting for someone to pity or care. I was an archaeologist, a woman who had crossed deserts, blizzards, and mountains. How could I let a trivial fall and the indifference of my loved ones defeat me? After 3 days of lying motionless, I forced myself to sit up. Every move of my arms and legs was a challenge. I held onto the bed frame, stretched myself to stand, and trudged across the cold room, leaning on my old wooden cane. My faithful friend in old age. Each step, though painful, was also an affirmation to myself that I was still alive, that I could still be in control of my own body. I did not want to continue to exist as a burden, did not want to be a woman defined by pain and abandonment. When I regained some strength, the first thing I did was turn on my computer. My hearing aid had not been replaced, but I could read, and I reread Laura Bennett's email. My eyes fell on the familiar lines about the ancient pottery found in Utah, a study I had once been fascinated by. My mind was opened. I began typing each response, analyzing the technical features, the distinctive marks of the Anasazi culture. Years of experience surged up inside me like a blocked underground river that suddenly began to flow. The words flowed in unison, each detail, each inference, each hypothesis, as if I had never left that world. In that moment, I woke up. I realized that what made me feel alive, meaningful, and fulfilled was never the grudging validation of Michael or Sarah. It was the dusty pottery, the ancient fossils, and the people who listened and appreciated my work. That was the world I belonged to. I had wanted a loving family so much that I had sacrificed my self-worth in search of acceptance from people who didn't really want to know me. And that, as it turned out, was the biggest mistake of my life. From that moment on, I made a crucial decision. I would live for myself, no longer the patient grandmother at every family party, no longer the overlooked mother, no longer the neglected old woman. I would be an archaeologist, a lover of life, knowledge, and freedom. This decision was not born of hatred, not of bitter revenge, but of an awakening, a clear declaration of my own worth and dignity. This was the beginning of a new chapter, a journey of strength, clarity, and hope. A few days after I began my recovery, I was sitting in the living room, trying to read an old archaeology book, my eyes still blurry from fatigue, when the doorbell rang. Not surprisingly, I found Michael standing outside, holding a box of bread, as if a few slices of cake could mend the wounds he had caused. Perhaps he thought a token apology and a material gift would be enough to smooth things over. "Mom, I'm sorry about the other day," he said, his voice flat and lifeless, as if he were fulfilling a duty rather than speaking from the heart. He placed the box on the table, avoiding my gaze, and added a flat, "I didn't mean it. It was just a joke." Michael deliberately downplayed the seriousness of his actions, as if pushing an 82-year-old woman into a lake was a minor oversight, a joke that could be forgiven. He didn't, or didn't want to, understand that the fall had not only damaged my body, but also shattered the fragile trust I had in him. I looked my son straight in the eye, and for the first time in years, I let my emotions show. No longer the resigned mother, no longer the woman who swallowed her tears to keep the peace. Harmless, I repeated, my voice hoarse but clear. Michael, you pushed me down. You hurt me, physically and emotionally. You broke my hearing aid, the last gift your father had left me. And you didn't even ask if I needed help finding it. That wasn't a joke. That was cruel disrespect. I didn't scream, but each word was a cold knife that cut through the silence, unforgiving. Michael shrugged, his usual gesture when he didn't want to take responsibility. You're exaggerating. I didn't know you were that weak. It's not that serious. He didn't apologize. He defended himself. He didn't repent. He countered. He dismissed my hurt as an overreaction, blaming my age and frailty instead of looking at his own actions. It wasn't mere indifference, it was a cruel denial of responsibility. That conversation did nothing to mend things. On the contrary, it deepened the already simmering distance between us. Looking at Michael, I knew one thing for sure. He would never understand me, and he would never change. He had failed, not only as a son, but as a human being lacking the most basic empathy. What hurt me most was not the fall, but the fact that this motherly love, for him, had never really existed. But this time, that disappointment did not make me fall. On the contrary, it made me more clear-headed than ever. I realized that I had to live for myself. Michael was no longer the support I could trust, nor was he the one who had the right to define the value of my life. I did not need forced approval, did not need cheap affection from duty. After Michael left, followed by his annoyance and coldness, I quietly went down to the basement, where my true soul was kept. The basement was more than a pile of old things. It was a treasure trove of my life. I opened the large wooden chest in the corner and carefully flipped through the pages of old field diaries, detailed sketches of excavation sites, notes on ancient ceramic techniques. The scent of old paper and dust rose up, familiar as a warm embrace from the past. I wasn't just rereading memories, I was preparing for the future. Each line was a reminder. I had been a leader of important projects, a woman who had lived her life for knowledge and passion. I began to sketch out a plan, write to Laura Bennett, learn more about the Utah discovery, and suggest a further research collaboration. I didn't need to take revenge on Michael with resentment or blame. The best revenge was to live a life worth living, vibrant, independent, and meaningful, without needing the approval of someone who didn't appreciate me. I would find true appreciation, true friendship, and joy in a world where I belonged, not in a family that knew only form and pretense. From that moment on, I knew one thing for sure. My life from now on would be mine, free, whole, and full of hope. And that decision, not a rebellion, but a journey of liberation. One cold evening later, Michael invited me to his house for dinner. I had no illusions that this was a warm family gathering. My instincts told me that this was not a dinner. It was a meeting with a purpose. I braced myself for the worst. When I entered the dining room, I found Michael and Karen sitting across from me, their faces as tense as strings, awkwardness poorly masked by politeness. After dinner, when the tea was still steaming, Michael spoke first. His voice had a false sweetness to it that I was too used to. "Mother," he said, his eyes trying to be kind, "Karen and I have thought about it a lot. Your fall at Lily's party, it really worries us. It shows that you are no longer safe on your own." He paused, his gaze expectant, as if hoping I would figure out the message on my own. Karen continued, trying to be gentle, but the confusion was evident on her face. "That's right, Mom. At the nursing home, there will be nurses around the clock, friends to talk to, and fun group activities. You'll be taken care of better. We've looked at a few places. They're beautiful, with beautiful gardens. They painted a bright picture, as if they were introducing a five-star resort, not a place to deal with an old lady they no longer wanted to deal with. The suggestion hit me like a cold electric shock, numb and bitter, an anger that didn't flare like fire, but burned deep and cold like steel. I realized what they were really saying. I was a problem, an extra piece of baggage that needed to be transferred. And what was most galling was that they were using the fall itself, which Michael had caused, as an excuse for their cruel decision. It was as if I had pushed myself down, and now I was being punished for it. A nursing home? I said, not loudly, but clearly and sharply. I looked straight into Michael's eyes, then turned to Karen, my gaze no longer soft. I don't need a nursing home. I'm still independent, and I will continue to be. You think I can't take care of myself just because of a fall? A fall that you caused, Michael. I emphasized the word you like a hammer blow to guilt, like an indictment in the cold dining room. The air froze for a few seconds, then quickly exploded into a heated argument. Michael hastily defended himself by saying that he was only thinking about my safety, as if that could wash away all the blame. Karen tried to calm him down, but the more she spoke, the more her insincerity was revealed. Every word that came out of their mouths only made it clearer that I was no longer the mother, the grandmother, who had devoted her life to work and family. They saw only an old, frail, troublesome figure, a liability that needed to be managed, dealt with, as soon as possible. I felt like I had been rejected from the place I once held in their hearts. All efforts to hold on to something called family were mercilessly shattered in that moment. I stood up, slowly but firmly, despite the pain in my body. I didn't need to shout because my eyes and voice at that moment were enough to shake the room. I'm not going anywhere. That house is mine. I will live there until the day I die, I said, each word like the sound of a stick hitting the wooden floor, resounding like a drum declaring war. No goodbyes, no lingering glances. I turned and walked out of that house, not just out of a dinner of lies, but out of a controlling relationship, a motherhood I no longer wanted to play. The door closed behind me, and with it, the expectations, the burdens, the last illusions of reconciliation. It was the final hurdle, and the deepest insult I had ever suffered from my own people. But I overcame it, not with anger, but with dignity. From that moment on, I no longer lived to please them. My life was mine, and I would live it the way I had chosen, with passion, independence, and pride. A quiet but fierce strength rose within me, a strength forged from pain, betrayal, and unwavering trust. And from now on, I could only move forward, for myself. Just days after my tense confrontation with Michael and Karen, as I was trying to regain my composure and begin to sort through the old books in my small library as a form of self-healing, a new email suddenly appeared in my inbox. I was used to the empty subject lines, but this time the words that popped up made me stop. Invited lecture, Denver History Museum. The sender was Dr. Susan Carter, director of the Denver History Museum. I opened the email with some hesitation, thinking that perhaps there had been a mistake. But no, every line was clear, formal, and well-intentioned. Susan Carter said she had heard about my contributions to archaeology, particularly my foundational work at Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. She wanted me to be the keynote speaker at the museum's next major symposium, an event that would bring together scholars, researchers, and the general public. That invitation was like a ray of sunshine that suddenly pierced the fog of melancholy and loneliness that had shrouded my soul in the past few days. The passion that I thought had been buried under the dust of age, under the cold and indifferent gaze of my relatives, suddenly reawakened, stronger than ever. I was no longer an abandoned old woman, seen as an old item that needed to be tidied up in a nursing home. I was Dr. Eleanor Hawthorne, the archaeologist who had laid the first bricks for research projects in the American Southwest. My name was still mentioned. My value was still recognized, not by my family, but by the academic and historical community where I truly belonged. With that awakening energy, I immediately went down to the basement, the place that had been my sanctuary. No longer a place to hide old memories and loneliness, it had become a space for regeneration. I began cataloging each of the artifacts that I had preserved for decades. Broken pottery pieces pieced together with patient hands and a heart that loved antiquities, crude but skillful stone tools that reflected the sophistication of prehistoric people, faded maps and notebooks filled with small lines, traces of months spent on the excavated land. Each artifact was not just a relic, but a piece of the larger story that I had spent my life telling. I touched each one, feeling connected to the past, as if I were still standing in the dusty ruins of the New Mexico desert. Once again, I was being myself. Just then, Ben arrived, the only grandson who had always kept the fragile bond between me and my family. He sat down beside me, his eyes hesitant and worried. Grandma, I know my father was wrong, but family is still family, right? You can't just cut him off, no matter what. He is still my father and your son. I looked at Ben, my sincere nephew, who still had feelings for me, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. I took his hand, my voice low but firm, gentle but decisive. Ben, she's not leaving anyone. She's just coming back to herself. She needs to live for what makes her feel good, not for people who want to control her life without caring how she feels. I didn't need to mention the party or the nursing home. Ben was smart enough to know what I was talking about. I squeezed his hand gently. You know, for more than 80 years, she has lived for others, for her family, for her career, for her duty. Now it is time for her to live for herself. The invitation from the Denver Museum is not simply a professional honor. It is an affirmation. She is still there. The work she did still has value. She is still a part of this world, not a discarded part, as some people think. As the words left my mouth, I felt something lifted from my heart. Relief, serenity, as if a lifetime of silent sacrifice had been released. Finally, I could say what I had kept inside for so long, a truth that did not need permission to exist. The invitation to speak was more than a career opportunity. It was a beacon of light on the path I had traveled, a clear indication that I was still who I was, a respected intellect, a true contributor. It was my response to the doubts, the disdain, and the coldness of those closest to me. I did not need permission to assert my worth. I did not seek validation from those who did not understand me. I would stand, not by compromise, but by my own intelligence, my own dignity, and the legacy I had devoted my life to creating. Since receiving the invitation from the Denver History Museum, my life has been infused with a new vitality. I have devoted all my time and energy to preparing for the presentation, not out of obligation, but out of a passion that seemed to have long been dormant. Every morning, I wake up earlier than usual, not because of the pain of age, but because of the eagerness to work, to live fully with my expertise and love for history. I flip through old notes, pore over thick textbooks, and meticulously arrange each slide. The house, which was once a place to keep memories, has now become a living workshop, filled with the sound of pages turning, the tapping of keyboards, and the light of returning ideas. A few days before the presentation, a pale pink card arrived at my house. It was a birthday invitation from Sarah for my little granddaughter, Lily. Looking at the card, I no longer felt the pressure or sadness I had felt before. Time had changed many things, and most of all, I had changed. I was no longer the woman who lived for acceptance or feared the judgmental gazes of a family that no longer valued my presence. In the past, I would have immediately felt guilty for missing such a special occasion, but now I had a bigger goal. The museum lecture was more than a professional event. It was a confirmation of everything I had worked so hard to build. It was the culmination of decades of dedication, the culmination of an academic journey I was proud of. I no longer had to think twice about turning down a party where I knew I would sit there in silence, lost and forgotten. It was no longer a sacrifice, but a conscious choice. I sat down at my desk, picked up a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Without hesitation, I wrote a polite letter to Sarah. I explained briefly that I had an important presentation to give at the Denver Museum of Art, an event that had been scheduled and could not be postponed. I didn't bring up old hurts or rehash the bitterness of my birthday party. Instead, I chose to set boundaries, clear, calm, and respectful. I wished Lily a happy birthday and promised to send a gift that might not arrive in time, but one that would carry my love and precious stories about my heritage that I knew would make her proud in the future. As I sealed the envelope and took it to the mailbox, a gentle sense of freedom washed over me. It was as if I had just removed an invisible chain that had been tied to me for years. This decision was not a moment of protest or a flare-up of anger. It was a quiet, resolute affirmation. I had the right to live a life of my own, free from superficial obligations or unfair expectations. It was a huge shift. From someone who had always been content to please others, to someone who knew how to prioritize myself, protect my passions, and live with dignity. I was no longer a victim, but the author of my own story. I realized that for years I had been trying to please people who didn't really care, and that was eating me away. Now I choose a different path. I choose to live for myself, for the beliefs, values, and ideals that I have always pursued. This is not selfish. It is an essential act to save my soul and my freedom in my final years. I will no longer let anyone else define my worth. Only I can do that. With a calm mind and a determined heart, I return to my desk, to my books and unfinished research papers. The presentation at the museum was approaching, and that was where I belonged, the pinnacle I deserved to reach. The day of the conference at the National Museum in Denver finally arrived. I woke up in the dark, feeling a mixture of nervousness and joy. I picked out my best suit, a simple yet elegant charcoal gray, which was exactly what I was, calm yet powerful. My new hearing aids worked perfectly, and the sounds around me suddenly came alive, as if the world were calling out to me. I ran a final check through my presentation, the PowerPoint slides showing each artifact, each archaeological site, were all ready. I still needed my cane for support, but today my steps were no longer slow or timid. On the path leading to the museum, I walked with rare confidence, not the gait of an old woman, but the steady steps of a scholar about to be honored for a lifetime of dedication. The vast museum hall greeted me with the soft light of the morning and the solemnity of the artifacts. Everything seemed to whisper, "Welcome home." As I stepped onto the podium, the auditorium erupted in applause. Professors, students, former colleagues, all stood to greet me. I saw familiar faces from my old classrooms. Their eyes still lit up when I lectured, just as they always did. And there were new faces, young, curious, eagerly awaiting something greater from a generation before. Dr. Susan Carter, the museum's director, introduced me with words of deep appreciation. She spoke not only of my role in archaeology, but also of a pioneer who had paved the way for modern research on the Anasazi and Chaco Canyon. She called me a living legend, a phrase that seemed far-fetched, but today it sounded like a warm recognition, healing old wounds, wounds left by my family's silence and distance. I began my presentation with a clear, confident voice, carrying not only knowledge, but also the passion of a lifetime. I spoke of Chaco Canyon, of the great works of ancient civilization, of the mysteries yet to be solved, of the details that history had forgotten. But my talk was not dry. I told stories. I recounted the feeling of discovering the first pottery fragment buried in the hot sand, of the razor-sharp stone tools created by craftsmen thousands of years ago. I told of lonely nights in the desert, of the starry sky that seemed to touch history, and of golden sunrises that lit a fire in my heart. I relived it all, more vividly, more intensely, and more truthfully than ever before. I felt like I was back to my most radiant self. My eyes lit up with pride, and the whole room held its breath, listening to every word. The presentation ended, but the hands kept going up. The questions came in waves, deep, challenging, but I greeted them all with a smile and composure. I answered them with maturity, with wisdom honed over the years. There were no more scrutinizing eyes, no more whispers, just pure respect. I saw genuine admiration in their eyes, and that was enough to make me feel recognized, to belong. This was not just a presentation, but the culmination of my journey to affirm my worth. Compared to the coldness and judgment from Michael, Sarah, and Karen, this moment made it clear to me that my true worth had never been dependent on their approval. That value existed in the heart of the academic community, a place that respected my efforts and knowledge, a place that understood the legacy I had left. The applause, the congratulations, the looks of gratitude, all were evidence of a life lived with purpose and dedication. I no longer felt the need for validation from Michael or Sarah. I had it all: an academic legacy, an undying love for science, and genuine appreciation from those who understood me. This was my victory, not a victory of revenge, but the victory of a soul that had healed and set free. I had emerged from the darkness of my hurt, and here I stood, strong and radiant. I had found my true meaning in life, and I would live the rest of my years with a peace and pride that nothing could ever take away. A few days after the brilliant conference at the National Gallery, the afterglow of the applause still fresh in my mind, I sat in the quiet living room, sorting through the last of my presentation materials. Outside the window, the afternoon sun was pouring golden light on the windowsill, gentle as a belated greeting. Then the doorbell rang, a short but sharp sound that cut through the peace. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I knew. Only Michael and Sarah would come without an appointment, with a surprise that never brought good things. The door opened, and there they stood, two familiar faces, but no longer familiar. Both of them looked tense, unable to hide their annoyance. Sarah spoke first, her voice full of resentment. "Mom, why didn't you come to Lily's birthday? She was so upset. You promised." Michael followed immediately, his voice gruff as a sentence. "You're making a big deal out of it. It's just a birthday party. Why couldn't you come?" I looked at them. It was no longer the look of a mother who had pleaded for understanding, no longer the bowed head of a grandmother who had tried to hold on to affection. Now there was a cold stillness in me, a strength born of calloused hurt and newly awakened pride. I no longer needed to explain or beg for forgiveness. I had stepped out of the shadow they had cast over me for so many years. "Did I complicate things?" I asked, my voice calm, but each word was carved in stone. No need to scream, just the truth. "So, my fall into the water tank was a harmless joke? You didn't apologize. Not a word. You humiliated me in front of everyone, pushed me down, and took away the only thing that was left of your father, a precious memory that I cherished more than anything else. And you think I'm going to pretend nothing happened?" I looked them straight in the eye. Michael and Sarah avoided my gaze like strangers, and I realized they had never really looked at me, the real me, before. And now you come here asking why I didn't attend a party when you were the ones who talked about sending me to a nursing home like a piece of junk? I continued, my voice calm, but each sentence cutting. No, I won't let that happen. I'm no longer the mother or grandmother you can disrespect or manipulate. I'm Dr. Eleanor Hawthorne, a scientist, a woman whose worth far exceeds the stereotype you want to impose. Michael and Sarah stood frozen, as if they didn't recognize the person speaking to them as the mother they once knew, or rather, never really knew. They stammered some incoherent excuse, but I turned away, ending the conversation. I didn't want to listen. On the corner of the table, the laptop was still open. A new email lit up from Laura Bennett. I clicked, and there before me was an official invitation from the University of Utah. A research project on ancient ceramics was about to begin. A new journey, an opportunity I knew I couldn't refuse. I turned, took one last look at them, the two children standing frozen in the doorway between past and present. I have accepted the University of Utah, I announced, not as an escape, but as a manifesto. I am leaving. From now on, my life will be devoted to science, to the values I believe in, and to myself. I began packing my suitcase, not clothes, makeup, or everyday items. I packed my lifelong books, my time-worn notes, and a few small archaeological artifacts, each one a piece of memory, a slice of history that I would carry in my heart. Each item packed into the suitcase carried not just its physical weight, but also its soul and aspirations. I knew my life was opening a new chapter, not the end, but the brilliant beginning of the most beautiful part of the journey. I still feel a little bitter, not because of anger, but because of regret for relationships I once hoped to save. But I am no longer bound by that. I have learned that the true meaning of life does not lie in forced hugs or empty words of love from people who never tried to understand me. It lies in passion, in recognition from the intellectual community, and above all, in the self-respect I have regained. My revenge is not to hurt, but to revive myself, not to destroy the past, but to build a brighter future. That is the highest response, not in anger, but in accomplishment, not in shouting, but in the proud silence of one who knows who he is. I no longer live to please anyone. I live for myself, for the values I believe in, for the legacy I have built, and for the horizons of discovery that still beckon me ahead. The house that was once a place of loneliness and hurt now becomes a landmark, the beginning of a glorious and liberating journey. My life, Eleanor Hawthorne, has taught me a valuable and unforgettable lesson. Sometimes, in the effort to seek acceptance and love from those closest to us, we lose ourselves. We mold ourselves into models that do not reflect our true selves, hoping to be recognized, loved. But in return, we only receive coldness and invisible wounds. I used to think that my happiness was tied to the approval of my family, that if only Michael and Sarah understood me, I would feel complete. But the incident at Lily's birthday party, along with the idea of putting me in a nursing home, was a violent wake-up call. It forced me to face the truth. It was time to stop hoping for something that no longer existed. I had a choice, to continue suffering in silence or to chart my own path forward. I realized that my true legacy lies not in forced relationships, but in my research, in the footprints I leave on ancient lands, where every piece of pottery, every layer of soil tells the story of time. That is where I belong, not in the kitchen with its heavy conversations, but in the earth, where the past whispers to me. My revenge did not come in the form of hatred. It was a journey of liberation, a silent but powerful rebellion. I did not need to shout that I deserved it. I just needed to live as if it were already obvious. I found my own voice, the voice that had been drowned out by judgment and prejudice, and let it resonate through actions, through decisive decisions. Living a life true to myself was how I rose from the brokenness. Life is too short to waste playing a role that isn't meant for you, especially when that role makes you forget who you truly are. What matters most is not how many people love you, but having the courage to love yourself, even when no one else does. Listen to your inner voice. It never lies. Pursuing your passion is not selfishness, it's an honest way of life, because that's where you can truly be yourself. Our strength, especially those of us who have been overlooked, lies not in responding with anger, but in standing firm without needing to prove it. When you are true to yourself, you not only find peace, but you become an inspiration to others who are also lost in their own journeys. My life is a testament to the fact that it is never too late to start over, to set healthy boundaries, to choose a path that is true to your heart, and to live a life of depth and meaning. Your true legacy is not the approval of others, but the mark you leave behind through what you believe, build, and contribute. Cherish your own legacy because it is the only thing that will last, even when all else fades away with time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story.